Okay, now let's see how to test an attribute directive. So in the app folder, look at this highlight directive. So this is a very simple directive. The selector here is an attribute called highlight. So wherever we apply this attribute, that element will be highlighted. The default color is yellow, but we can override it when setting the attribute. And here's the implementation of the ng onChanges method. So all we're doing here is setting the background color for the element on which we have applied this directive. Now, if the background color is provided as part of setting this attribute, it will be used here. Otherwise, we'll use the default color, which is yellow. Now let's take a look at the spec file for this directive. To use this directive, I've created a component in this spec file. This component has a very simple template, and in this template, you can see different ways we can use our directive. So in the first example, we have set the highlight attribute to cyan color, and in the second example, we have not set any values for the highlight color. So we expect it to be yellow. So here's the lesson. When testing attribute directives, you should create a host component in your test to test various usages of that attribute. Now in our test suite, we have this before each block, just like before, where we configure our testing module. Note that in the declarations, I have added both the component and the directive. This is very important. If you forget to add the directive here, it will not be applied because Angular will not recognize it. So at this point, when we call the DetectChanges method, Angular will render the components template, and it will ignore any attribute directives that it doesn't recognize. Now, let's write two tests for this directive. One to test it with a value, and one without a value. So, it should highlight the first element with cyan. So we're going to get a reference to this element, starting from our fixture dot debug element dot query all by CSS. I'm going to get all paragraphs and then pick the first one. So this is going to be our debug element. Now we expect debug element dot native element dot style dot background color to be cyan. So that's our first test. Now the second test. It should highlight the second element with yellow. So I'm going to copy this line from our last test and change the index to 1. Now we have the second element. Also, I'm going to copy this line and change the color to yellow. Save. Okay, all tests are passing. Beautiful. However, there is a tiny problem with this second test. If in the future I decide to change the default color here from yellow to something else, this test is going to break. Because here, we're specifically looking for yellow. So this test is very specific. We can make it a little bit more general, so it's not so fragile. So I'm going to change the test title. It should highlight the second element with the default color, whatever it is. Now, how do we get that? We should get a reference to the highlight directive applied to this debug element. So, de.injector, you have seen that before, right? .get, and here we pass the type of our directive, which is highlight directive. And this gives us a reference to that directive. Now I can change our assertion from yellow to directive dot default color. So this way our test is more general. Save. And all our tests are passing. So this is how you test attribute directives.